In this video, I'm going to take a look at part of the Nik software suite, in particular the Silver Efex Pro part of the suite, which deals with black and white conversion. Nik software is a range of plug-in filters that work with Adobe Photoshop and Lightroom. So I'm going to start off with this colour image, which is open in Photoshop at the moment, and you can access the Nik filters in two ways. You can either go to Photoshop filter and down to the bottom of the selection drop-downs where you'll find the Nik collection, or you can use the floating Nik suite panel which appears when you download the software and open Photoshop or Lightroom. So I'm going to take a little look in this video about Silver Efex Pro 2, which is black and white conversion software. In future videos we'll take a look at some of the other parts of the suite. So I'm going to click the little floating panel to access Silver Efex Pro. It just takes a few seconds to initialize. Okay, so this is the workspace that you have in Silver Efex Pro. On the left-hand side, you can see we have a selection of preset filtered renderings, and the top one is neutral, which is kind of without any of the effects. Well, it's turned black and white, but there's no extra effects at the moment. And then as we look down, there are various presets which you can either use if you find one you like, or you can use these as a basis for choosing a particular look, and then go to the right side of the workspace and alter the sliders and the buttons. So there's quite a lot of different presets which use different ways of approaching, different contrast, high contrast, low contrast, some with borders, some with colour effects or tints and tones such as sepia and yellow. So you can choose any of these and then adapt them to your own particular tastes, or you can just use one as it is. What I'm going to do here is use the neutral one and then play with the controls on the right hand side of the workspace. So at the top we have brightness, which kind of does what you expect it to, just alters the brightness of the image, and contrast, which again alters the contrast of the image. The third control down is structure, which is a contrast control, but it's a micro contrast control. So as I alter it, you can see the actual basic whites and blacks of the image don't go mad, but you can see that the sort of mid-tone contrast in the picture becomes more exaggerated. And you have minus structure as well, so it tones down the contrast in the mid-tones. This is a little bit like some of the filters in Photoshop and Lightroom, like texture and the other one that I can't remember the name of, but it is quite different in another way as well. I think in some ways it's possibly a better tone control, a better contrast control. Clarity is the one I couldn't think of a moment ago. So it's a little bit like clarity and texture, but it's, in my opinion, it's a little bit superior to both of those. However, you know, this is a subjective opinion, of course. If you then click the little downward arrow on the structure control, Of course, the contrast and the brightness also have extra controls on them, which sort of alter the tones in slightly more subtle ways. So with a structure control, you have a contrast control for the different tones of the image. So you've got highlights, midtones and shadows. And there's also a fine structure, which is an even more subtle way of adjusting the tones. You also have a tone protection for the shadows and the highlights, which again is a very subtle way of slightly filtering out the effects that the structure control has on either the darkest or the lightest parts of the image. Then we have control points, which I will come back to in a moment. And underneath that we have the color filter. So the grey button is just the neutral one, and then we have red, which is quite an extreme contrast, orange, yellow, green and blue. So really this is kind of a simulation for the physical filters that could be used with film photography, put over the lens in film photography to affect the emulsion of a black and white film. And again you have fine controls for the hue and the strength of the filter. So I'm going to leave this on yellow, which is kind of it amplifies the contrast but a little bit less than with the red filter. Next one down we have the film types. So if you click on the drop down filter, you can see there's a large array of film simulation types. So we've got things like Agfa, Fuji, Ilford, many of the films that analog photographers will be familiar with. So Kodak, Agfa, Fuji, Ilford, mostly. So if you particularly like using a film from the analog days, then you can probably create a similar look with one of these filters. So I'm going to just leave that on neutral at the moment. You've also got other drop downs which affect the grain, so you can add grain to an image, and you can there's a color channel sensitivity slider, so you can play around with the amount of effect that the different filters have. You have a curves diagram, so you can play around with the contrast using a curves control. And right down here at the bottom you have toning. So there is the option to go for quite a large variety of different toning. These are sort of like, again, simulations of the kind of toning that you used to do in analog photography. So when you had a print, you could put it through a toner bath for cyanotype, blue, sepia, coffee, etc., etc. So those can be really interesting. I often quite like using this split toner. The third one down is kind of a slightly greeny tinge, which I use at quite a low strength. Just gives you a slight but quite subtle tint. There's a hue, so you can change the hue of that tone. There is a strength for the silver toning. There is a balance for the split toning, paper hue, paper toning. You have the ability to vignette your image, which is quite similar to the ones in Lightroom. You've also got preset vignettes, which you can just drop down the selection to choose. There's a burn edges control, so you can add different amounts of burnt edges. So if you choose a top edge to burn in and then add to the strength, you can see that burning the top of the picture. You can add the size as well and the transition. which is very useful. I'm going to turn that off for now. And then finally we have image borders. So you can choose, if you wish, to fit a white border or a black border or a variety of other different borders which kind of simulate printing frames that we used to use in the darkroom. And if you choose one of these kind of irregular borders, say like number 6, there is also a vary border or a clean and rough or a spread of the border, so you can alter the size of it too. So I can make it narrower or wider, and you can vary the border just by clicking that button, and there's thousands and thousands of different varieties of slightly ragged edge that you can have. And right at the bottom there is a loop and histogram section, which kind of shows you where the different tones fall on this kind of zone scale. Shows you the different zone, the different brightness areas of your photo falls into. I'm not quite sure how useful this is unless you're a proponent of the zone system of photography, but it's something that I haven't seen on other software, and it could be useful for possibly, foreseeably. So back up to the control points. If you add a control point to your picture, you get this little sort of target point, and you get a drop down of sliders actually over your image. So you can move this around any way you want it in the picture, and you can do selective toning or controlling of part of your image. The top slider just alters the size of the area that your control point covers. So if I want to do this patch of sky, just move it up a little bit and then enlarge the circle to cover most of the sky. And then the brightness is the top slider, so I can brighten it or darken it. Then I have contrast, and then I have structure. So I can just add structure to part of the image. I also have amplify whites, amplify blacks, fine structure, and selective colorization. If I use selective colorization, it brings back some of the color that was in the original shot before I turned it to black and white, which can be quite interesting. The control point panel over here is an on-off switch, so that just shows me what effect it's having. There is a toggle to, if you have more than one control point, you can group them together or ungroup them. If you click this little button, you can get a duplicate control point. So if I click that, that gives me another one. So I can move an exact copy of that down to another area of my picture, so you can see that some of the colours coming back in the grass down here now. And if I wanted to group all those, well, supposing I had another one, supposing I copied it again and moved it to another area, then I could click group the selected control points together, and then any adjustments that I made to one control point would then apply to all the control points that were selected. As kind of just a little final point, I would say that probably Silver Efex Pro is one of the most popular black and white conversion bits of software out there. It's very flexible. It has lots and lots of presets which you can just play with if you're not in the mood to do a very sort of in-depth conversion. You might find something straight off the shelf that you like the look of. Or if you look at the right-hand side of the panel, there is a great deal of variety of control you can exercise over an image, either straight from a neutral standpoint or if you've chosen one of the presets, you can start altering it from there. In the next video, I'll probably take a look at one of the other Nik software programs.